Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hi, and welcome to the New Warehouse Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Lawton. This week, I am joined by Todd Boone, who is the Director of Product Management at Zebra Technologies. You may remember Zebra Technologies from previous episodes, and I'm sure you are quite aware of Zebra and the breadth of their product offerings, as they are all over the place, and especially this holiday season, I'm seeing them more in retail stores as well, with mobile checkouts and different things of that nature. So a lot of different products, especially products that are utilized within the warehouse. But they just recently came out with a new system called FulfillmentEdge, which Todd is going to talk to us about today. And he's also going to talk to us about something that's really cool and I think really exciting for the future of our space and the future of picking and different types of actions that go within the warehouse and how we could utilize this new tool. So we're going to have Todd on to discuss those things. So Todd, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. So, from a professional standpoint, an industry standpoint, I've been in the business for 18 years now, initially starting with a different name that you may recognize and some people may recognize of Scion Technologics, okay. Which then went through some different iterations to Scion and eventually getting acquired by Motorola Solutions, which then, of course, was acquired by Zebra to become Zebra Technologies. So although several different companies, all typically within the same industry. And within that framework, I've done many different roles, I guess, mostly on the outward front, but everything from marketing and product management and so product marketing as well as being in the field and doing sales. So most recently, before I moved back into product management, was actually in corporate strategy as well. So looking at things a little bit further down the road in terms of what we might want to place our bets in, which now from a product management, in terms of my current role focused on some of the more innovative solutions, actually has served pretty well.
Okay. All right. Really interesting. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, for those that don't know, I mean, as I said before, Zebra is kind of everywhere at this point. So why don't you give us just a little bit of a brief overview of what Zebra does for maybe the few people out there that are not familiar with you guys?
Sure. So, really, I mean, as you kind of mentioned, I mean, we're in so many different places with so many different products, but right. Sometimes the way that I think about this to simplify it is, we typically connect people, assets, and data. And, maybe said a slightly different way is we're kind of on the edge of digitization, right? We bring the analog world into digital in various ways. Zebra and its heritage in terms of making barcode printers is kind of that entry point a lot of times to accept goods into the digital realm, right? Mm-hmm. By, first printing a label and then, of course, reading it with one of our mobile computers. But, of course, it's not the only way, right? And we've got, RFID and various other ways that we can basically inject, but overall with an overarching view typically of, hey, how do we make these connections? And then to do that, what types of mobile devices, so barcode scanners do we need? What types of mobile computers do we need? What types of RFID options do we need? And so with that, and I think there's that physical collection, and then moving beyond that, the next step is how do we then take that data and not just provide it to the back end systems that are typically running business operations, but also, maybe inject a bit more intelligence into that and analytics so that our customers can actually make better operational and business decisions.
Okay, definitely. And I think, when you talk about the mobile printers, I mean, it's kind of where it started, but you guys have grown into so much more. And, like I was saying, I mean, I've seen you guys everywhere. Like I was at, 2 episodes ago, I did with Locust Robotics, and I was up at their site, and they had Zebra printers that they're hooking up to their robots. And then I was at Walmart, actually, and I had one item that I was buying. The lines were super long, and there was a guy standing there, and he said, "Are you ready to check out?" I said, "Yeah." And sure enough, he had a Zebra handheld right there, checked me out with it, and I was very, very happy. So it's pretty cool to see how many kind of facets of business in general you guys get involved in. Obviously, we're talking about distribution here and warehousing, and obviously you guys are involved in transportation as well. We talked to Cardinal Logistics, and you guys are involved with them. So you guys really touch a lot of different things. But I think a lot of times when we think of Zebra, we think of the hardware, and we think of the printers and handhelds, things of that nature. But you guys just came out with this FulfillmentEdge system. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what that is and how that kind of works?
Sure. So FulfillmentEdge really is a solution designed to help warehouses and logistics operations deal with the onslaught from e-commerce in many respects. If I was to distill it down and simplify it down, we actually look at it, and so it's kind of a multifaceted answer, if I can look at it that way. There's really 2 throngs to this. One of them was we started looking at some new technologies, right? New wearable technologies like heads-up displays, for example. Right. And we wanted a better way of actually enabling the user experience on that device. Okay. And subsequently, we also saw, a lot of our customers talking about their warehouses bogging down because they're working with, dated, old WMS systems that have been in operation for many, many years. And, and the reality is they were doing the job really, really well. And they had no reason to actually update them historically until they started delivering fulfillment out of those warehouses that weren't really designed for that, right? And, in a sense, what you had was, rather than shipping, pallets of goods to stores, as one example, you would have, warehouses providing one item to one person and driving that down the street. So we figured with this, we were looking at the warehouse, more holistically and saying, how can we, sort of drive a different experience that will help offset that, those challenges that they're in fact facing. So FulfillmentEdge is in fact a software platform. It does plug in to a back-end WMS or ERP system. It really doesn't replace any of the functionality that they do, but rather augments what they can do at the edge. And so, before when I was talking about mobile or, kind of that digital edge for enterprise, this is kind of that one step further of saying, okay, not only is it now the digital edge of the enterprise in terms of bringing that information in, but also optimizing the workflows at the edge. And so FulfillmentEdge is really about making the workers that are doing fulfillment activities within a warehouse environment, and in fact, it will extend, beyond warehouses really as we move forward with it, optimizing those workflows so that our customers can actually do those fulfillment activities much more efficiently. And so then we take the information from the WMS and we put that bulk information back into the WMS, but we certainly don't ever replace a WMS system.
Okay, interesting. So it's kind of like an add-on to the WMS. It sounds like it makes the WMS a little smarter.
Yeah, and really on the mobile front, and actually an analogy that you might think about is like, if we think of a warehouse execution system, for example, right? This is, almost thinking of like a mobile execution system, right? More of a plug-in, and exactly what you said. It's making that WMS better and smarter and at the edge where the workers are, performing their tasks.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like, from what I'm reading about it, and what you're telling me is that it's really focused on creating more efficiency. So it's kind of taking the data from the WMS and then it's arranging it in a way, and I guess giving the output to the picker on what the best, pick walk or course of action for them is to take. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple different layers. So that's certainly one aspect of it. So most warehouses today are driven with a terminal emulation interface. And so what that's doing is it's variable depending on the age of the WMS system as well, right? And so some of the newer WMS systems have a lot more of some of this edge type of functionality. We were still looking to take it a step further, but there definitely is more there. Some of the older ones don't have nearly as much, and so there's really two parts to this. One is taking the batch of tasks that needs to be done that day and optimizing it in terms of, who it goes to and where, and when. That's certainly one part of it. The other side of it, though, is then creating a completely new interface so that we're modernizing that interface on the one hand, so it's more of a GUI display. But I think with Fulfillment Edge, we've also, because we've been able to, take all of that data, we were also able to change what we present to the user and when, right, within that user experience. So we can create some pretty interesting, new workflows that are able to kind of drive that productivity improvement that our customers are looking for.
Got it. So actually on the screen and what they're seeing, or whether it's like a heads up or whatever the case may be, is actually different as well, and you can kind of drive some more efficiency through better screen steps and I guess more intuitive screens as well, correct?
Exactly. More intuitive screens and, rethinking what information needs to be presented to the worker and when, so that they basically just get exactly what they need to do their job, and there's no superfluous information that's kind of distracting sometimes. Yeah. And it really dramatically simplifies things down, and they can go faster.
Okay, that's perfect, and I think that's a big key as well as we try to hire, especially now during peak season, and we just had Cyber Monday and everything. It's really a key to be able to make it as simple as possible. So when you bring in seasonal workers or some temps or something, it's easier for them to get up and going. Is that kind of what you're seeing? Is that it's reducing the amount of training time?
That's actually a huge part of it. Historically, when Zebra has measured like the ROI that we try to deliver to our customers, it was typically and historically around just the overall efficiency gain, right? Which makes a lot of sense. But what you just described there, that onboarding gain is also incredibly important, and we have made, I think, massive strides with that as well, because again, just kind of reverting back when it's more of a terminal emulation screen, and I think most people on the podcast would probably know what that is, but an easy analogy is it looks kind of like a DOS command prompt type of interface, and people are given their commands in a very sort of command prompt way. By taking it and making it very visually based, we're, especially with new workers coming in and oftentimes younger workers coming in, it suddenly starts to mimic something that they're very familiar with, and that's the phone in their pocket, right? And Definitely. So now that gap is suddenly reduced. And then because we control the entire workflow, we can inject or remove steps as required that might also make that overall, task easier for them to do. And perhaps either provide more context around what they're doing or less context, right? So, some of that may be as simple as, rather than, hey, I know this was a command prompt F5 before. Yeah. Now it's just a visual button that I can interact with. That's kind of the GUI side of it. Right. But the other side is when we start adding and or subtracting information that they don't need, that's where the simplification comes in that also helps them go faster.
Definitely. I think that's huge too. I mean, I was just thinking and remembering a couple years ago, probably like 5 years ago or so, I was working for an operation, and during our peak season, which was this certain product that we would bring in, and it was like a seasonal product, it was crazy. We would bring a lot of temps in to pick them, and there was always a huge debate on whether we take the time, because we know that they're going to be there just for maybe like a month or so to get through these huge amount of orders. There was always this debate, do we take the time to get them set up in our voice pick system and train them out? Is it worth it to do that? Because it wasn't so simple to do. So being able to kind of simplify that and make the onboarding time, like you said, a lot shorter, I think makes a huge difference in operation, especially since, the busiest times are kind of dependent on that influx of new workers, whether they're, temp to hire, temporary, whatever the case may be. I think that makes a huge difference, especially during that peak season. So I'm really, really happy that you guys are doing that.
Absolutely. And, a lot of the customers that we've been involved with to date are seeing pretty massive gains, like over 90% improvement in that training time. So like a 90% plus reduction where, a training time that may have taken 4 to 6 weeks may now be just a period of hours till that person is kind of at the productivity baseline that they're going for. And that's also massive. So as you mentioned, there's the seasonal side, and then the other challenge within the warehouse today and warehouses in general is just labor availability.
Right.
And and there's kind of two fronts to that. One is the shortage itself, but then it also drives a lot of people changing from one location, and one, company to another.
Right.
And those turnover rates, I mean, average, I think the last figures I saw were a little over 30%, but some of the customers that we're talking to had substantially more than that. And so, if you're talking of, 40, 50% of your workforce that you might need to onboard in any given year, reducing that training time has a pretty substantial operational benefit.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's a good point. I was just talking to somebody about that last night. Actually, the competition to get employees in some places, like where I'm located in the New Jersey area. I mean, there's so many warehouses in that small vicinity that if I think some of the mindsets of some workers are, if it doesn't work out here, like I can go down the street and get a job, like no problem. So you really kind of have that issue, like you were talking about with turnover, just because of the competition there is. So dealing with that too, I think is a big thing for the reduction in onboarding as well. So to hear, 90% gains, that's pretty remarkable. I think that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our customers, I think the nirvana, and some have termed it like actually instantaneous onboarding. We're certainly not there, but it's kind of like a step in the right direction because, when we started hearing more and more terms like that, we realized just how big a pain point it was.
Definitely. So now what about in terms of, I saw that the Fulfillment Edge is helping pick productivity improve by 24%. So now how is that actually going into effect, and how soon are operations seeing that type of improvement?
So that improvement is pretty quick. And just to sort of baseline how we got to that number is actually, it's an aggregation of a number of different workflows, and that's a running average effectively between them. So some are a little bit more, some are a little bit less, because as we've injected into more and more of these solutions into customer environments, there is no sort of one metric, right? So a customer that is picking, let's say in a high density, like let's say pharmacy, and they're picking pillboxes, has a very different pick rate than somebody that's picking apparel in a warehouse, right? So one might be literally doing, $1,500 an hour, and the other one might be doing like $200. And so when we look at this, there's a number of different, most of them around picking type of scenarios, but a number of different workflows that Fulfillment Edge can work in. And then that 24% is really that aggregate average. And so where we're driving that, a lot of that is through the user experience. And a lot of that also comes from the fact that I think I should just sort of mention the HD4000 at this point, because it is our head-mounted display. And what that does, when you think of a head-mounted display, and there's all sorts of really cool YouTube videos showing, crazy augmented reality things, and those, which, I think in the future will be here. Ours is much more specifically focused on the enterprise and truly creating hands-free workflows.
Okay.
And what we've done with it is a slightly different approach, whereby the optic is directly in front of the eye. And and just to kind of complete the picture, it's an accessory that plugs into our Android devices. So we've done a couple of things by doing that, right? Is it allows customers to augment implementations they may already have. But I think also importantly, from human factors perspective, it allowed us to keep it really lightweight, right? And small. And also transferable, right? So that the module itself could be transferred to different eyewear that different people could wear, for example, within their own, kind of keep the eyewear as their own, and then just put the heads-up display module on that. And so a lot of that, by creating this true hands-free modality and with this information right in front of the eye, what you start to see is really fluid workflows. And by that, I mean, you don't see pauses. So even if somebody's, and the most extreme example is, somebody's got a handheld mobile device, and what you will see is them pausing, looking at the device, maybe putting the device on a shelf or in their pocket or in a holster, doing what they were going to do, pausing, looking at the device. Now, it gets a bit better when you then go to a wearable, right? So we have wearable devices such as our WT6000, right? That could be strapped to your arm, your forearm, and it's faster, right? Because I can just glance at my arm and I can see my next task and then go. But, you're still having to pause to look. With the heads-up display and the ability to put the information right in front of the eye, that never happens, right? I never actually have to look down to a device. So that's one aspect of where that gain comes from, is just simply by moving those tasks very quickly and doing it in a way. And when I talk about redesigning or rethinking user experience, we use the sensors within the heads-up display that we will orient what's presented to the user based on where they're facing, right? So if I'm doing picking, when I turn around to put, and let's say I'm putting it in a multi-bin environment, the display knows I've turned it and automatically adjusts my instructions to what I need to do next. So I don't have to progress the workflow in some other way. It happens in, again, that very fluid way. And so, we can do some interesting things, in that manner. And so now there's never a stop. There's never a glance. They're just, moving through that workflow. So that's sort of one part of it. And actually, I think the hands-free part is a big part of it. Prior to that, I also touched on the fact that we've redefined kind of the user experience and the user interface by parsing down and making this graphically designed and really minimizing the amount of text. We've actually removed reading from most of the equation, and so we do everything with symbology and colors.
Okay.
And so now rather than the worker reading and comparing, they get very quick visual cues of, hey, I'm picking from this yellow, so there's a representation of where they're working. When I'm in the right place, it's green. When I'm in the wrong place, it's red. And same sort of thing. If I'm putting, I get very quick visual indications. So by reimagining that interface, by putting it right in front of the eye, we're able to get that sort of aggregate of 24% improvement.
Yeah, and you mentioned the HD4000. I think that's awesome. I'm really interested to see it in action and how it actually works. But I think that's a huge step. I know, we've kind of moved away in the industry from guns a little bit to wearables, but I think that takes it to a whole nother level. Because like you said, it's light, and I know some of the kind of the wrist wearables can get a little heavy sometimes, especially if you're wearing it for long, extended amounts of time. But I think that really is huge. And, thinking about just what you talked about, if you're using a gun, you're going back to that gun so many times and you're putting it down, you're picking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And it may seem like, minuscule seconds if you look at it in a big picture, but, if you add all those seconds up, I mean, you're really losing a ton of time and efficiency there. So being able to really make that picker hands-free is huge.
Absolutely. So we have, one customer that we did, we ran 31 of their workers, for example, through this process of where they were building pallets off a conveyor. And historically they were using a handheld gun, right, and just referring to it and then going to the pallet. And by kind of redesigning that where, and just to be clear on this too, like they still have a wearable, but they don't need to wear it on the wrist. It could be in their pocket because one of our Android devices will power that heads-up display. But at the same time, they don't ever have to pause and look at it. You can put it in a pocket or a pouch, and and that weight, as you mentioned, is not on the arm anymore. Yeah. But just in doing that, so they ran them through this. So this was more of a stage test that was randomized in terms of what they were picking and where it was going, so nobody could learn from the person ahead of them. And then with the gun, and then with the heads-up display on, combined with FulfillmentEdge. The average time to do it without FulfillmentEdge was about 5 minutes, roughly, to build those pallets. The average time with FulfillmentEdge was about 3.5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And so, and that just kind of shows sort of that combination of it's the same packages, the same number of packages, the same everything, just how much impact that can have. And like you said, because it's kind of human nature, even if I'm referring to whether it's a watch or a wearable, more of a wearable device, or even a separate device. A lot of times, if you watch people when they're walking through a warehouse and they're reading it, they stop.
Yeah.
And what we've seen with the heads-up display is they can glance at it, but they don't pause. So it's as you mentioned, it's all these little things, but they add up to a big value. Yeah.
Definitely. So the heads-up display. Now, how, I guess, do people select things, or is there no need to? So you would be wearing a ring scanner, I think I saw as the setup, correct? And
correct.
Now, say is it voice still, or how does it actually confirm it? Or is it just a scan that confirms and then it triggers it to move to the next thing?
Yeah, so that's actually entirely configurable. We have not implemented voice, although we will be in the future. We have explored with voice. We just haven't actually implemented it just yet. Typically, it is a scan that actually will move things along. And it's interesting just how much confirmation the customer needs. And so one of our customers that's more in the pharma industry, they want kind of everything scanned, right, and everything confirmed. And interestingly enough, even in the apparel world, a lot of times if they're putting it out and it's going out immediately, they want that scan to make sure that, hey, it might be the exact right shirt, except, let's make sure the size is right, and those types of things. Right. In some of the other workflows, they don't need, that same level of scanning, and it can actually slow the workers down and become wasteful. But that trigger of whether you're doing the confirmation by voice or by scan or maybe no confirmation is entirely configurable.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just thinking, I got to see it in action, see how it works. But I guess I'm just thinking if there's an exception or something, do they call that out, or how do they kind of maybe skip a pick or something like that?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, so the exceptions is an interesting one, because that's an area where, we believe so. We've got this tethered approach, so you still have an Android device, and as soon as you get to an exception, typically then they would pull out the mobile device, and there would be a menu to kind of draw them through, right? And so, because I think one of the challenges, when we looked down and we said, what's a good design? Actually, I'll take a step back. Actually, when we first started designing this head-mounted display, we put a cable on it because it was easier to create a prototype with a cable. And it's just kind of, but as we started talking to more and more customers, we started realizing a few things, is that, there are trade-offs. Like if you try and put everything, for example, on the head-mounted display, it starts getting really heavy, right? Because you've got batteries and you've got radios, and then typically even, the leading ones today don't go much past about 2 hours of runtime before they need a backup battery. And then as soon as they have an external power source, they have a cable going to them anyway. So that was one key consideration. Now, the other thing was the human factors, as I mentioned before, in terms of keeping it really light and transferable. And so if everything is kind of built into one and you've got many multi-shift environments, it's pretty hard to move that around in a way that if somebody's been picking with it for 12 hours and hustling through the system, then the person that gets it after them might not be as willing to put it on right away.
Yeah, it might be a little sweaty, right?
Yeah, a little damp. And so, so this is one where, like, as I mentioned, that module that the workers can be equipped with their own personal piece of glasses, and then they just clip this module in, plug it into their device, and off they go. But then, so there's some human factors elements. There's some just operational considerations, and also you don't need charging infrastructure, right? Like you don't need another gang of chargers for these things because they're just running off the device battery, which is designed for, with our devices for full shift. Right. But then the final consideration was one thing I kind of touched on earlier was really two elements to it. One is many of our customers said, well, if I've already got, like, let's say, WT6000s or TC52s deployed in my operations, I'd love to just be able to plug into them, right? And so we can do that and kind of extend that device to a hands-free modality. But then when there are exceptions, and if you've ever tried to do exceptions on a heads-up display itself, like, because some of them have you can swipe on the side of them, and I'm not talking HoloLens where you're doing gesture control in the air or those types of things, but just overall that user experience can be tough, right? And or completely voice-driven, but then there can be that training element that we talked about before.
Right.
And so even within that, like let's say they go to pick something at a short, they can easily call up a menu on their device. Again, it's still very big and visually driven. Input exactly what they're able to pick or not pick, and then close that down and kind of carry on, and then that's flagged immediately to the system. And so there's a benefit to the user that way, so that when we think of that training time, it's kind of comprehensive in terms of it being intuitive, even for those shorts and things like that they're going to encounter through a typical day.
Okay. All right. Cool. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I think the HD4000 I think it's awesome. And so you guys are going to be having it on display at Modex. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Awesome.
We will.
So I can come and check it out.
You can absolutely come and check it out, and we can certainly give you a full demonstration then, because part of the challenge with this is and I know some of it sounds a bit nebulous when you talk of kind of changing the user experience and what the person is seeing. I will say that a lot of times when our customers and our partners have put it on, they've gone, aha, like now I know what you're talking about. Yeah. And so I think seeing it in person definitely helps.
Yeah, definitely, because it's kind of, I guess it's not like when you think about wearables and like the handhelds, it's easy to relate to like your smartphone that you use. But when you think about like a heads-up display, that's not necessarily something that the average person runs into every day and outside of like a work environment. So being able to kind of touch it and see it, I'm sure makes a huge difference. It
does, and there's so many factors that go into it as well, right? With the user experience on the heads-up display, like it is a second display, but we don't present all the information that's on the device. It is parsed down, so that we're kind of presenting the right amount of information directly in front of the eye. But the other interesting thing with heads-up display is even I think how we've optimized the focal length and those types of things, so that you've got a very natural sort of ability for people to put this on and kind of get comfortable with it quickly and start using it, in a more natural way. And so it's a thing that you need to touch and feel to kind of see all of those factors, and how does it feel on, but then how does it work and interact with me, where it definitely helps.
Definitely. So I'm curious where you've implemented this already in different operations, what is the reaction from the employees who are actually using it? Are they enjoying it?
Yeah, the reaction is typically positive. You know, and it's interesting too. I think with some of the younger workers, you know, there's kind of that oh cool factor right off the bat.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I will say, I mean, right now it's new into the cycle, and we don't have, you know, massive amounts, and so I'll sort of temper it and say, I mean, overall right now it's positive, both from, you know, the users themselves as well as operations in terms of like how they see it working within their businesses. But the sample size is still fairly small. So, you know, I'm hoping to have, you know, maybe a more detailed answer that I could give you going, you know, maybe in a few months when we've got more of them out there. But I would say just in general terms, it's really quite positive.
Okay, definitely. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of different operations are going to be picking up pretty rapidly as the technology spreads, because I think it's really, really smart, and to make it, you know, pretty much hands-free work, I think that's huge, and it's like a huge time improvement as well. So I really appreciate
Absolutely.
you know what you guys are doing with these things, and definitely improving efficiency. I think that's huge for, especially as you said, the explosion in e-commerce, and especially for companies that are now, I guess, dipping their toes into e-commerce that maybe they have never done before, and it's a little different for them. So being able to provide them with solutions that can help them become more efficient and kind of tackle that faster paced work and more heavy duty, heavy volume type of work is definitely a huge thing. So if people are interested in learning more about Fulfillment Edge or HD4000, how can they do that?
So the easiest way is probably to go to our website. You know, there's some at least high level information there that they can garner with that solution. And then, you know, depending on their level of interest, we've got literally thousands of partners, and typically, you know, they probably already have one of their partners that they work with. And if they reach out to them, of course, they can then provide that more direct line into Zebra for more of a hands-on, you know, demonstration or, you know, session in terms of information about the solution overall. But, you know, certainly, you know, www.zebra.com is a great place to start.
Okay, great. We'll post more information about that on thenewwarehouse.com. So, Todd, thank you so much for being on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.